So a mama and oh shoot. I'm a mama and this is kind of like corresponding with my bedtime. So or baby bedtime. So I will be as participatory as I can, but I'll probably be on mute for a lot of this and I apologize. Um, but I just have to go back to favorite TV show of all time, which has to be The Simpsons. So
Do you want to hand it
Awesome.
off to somebody else, Robin?
sure. I am going to be not creative and I'll pass it off to Heather.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Knoxville. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. And my current favorite TV show is actually one that Jack and I started watching recently. It's called Special. It's about a young man with cerebral palsy and just like his day-to-day life. And it's pretty funny and heartwarming. So I really like it. Oh, and I'm going to pass it to my email buddy, Donna, who I've never met in real life, but hello, how you doing?
Hi, my name is Donna. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in Sacramento, the occupied territory of the Nisenan and Maidu people. And gosh, I'm watching some real trash right now. It's Outlanders on Netflix. And God, is it pornographic and gory violent. I'm watching it with my mother. It's really awkward. And I think, did Lynx go? All right, Lynx, take it away.
I haven't. Thanks, Donna. Hi, my name is Lynx. I go by she, they pronouns, and I'm also located in Greenville, Tennessee. And my current favorite TV show, I will admit, I've been into the Real Housewives since COVID started, and I've really needed something that is like the most mindless and pointless that I could focus on as possible. And that's it.
You want to pass it off to someone else, Lynx?
Okay, on to Maris. I hope I pronounced that correct.
Yep, you did great. So my name is Maris Porter. My pronouns are they, them. I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee. And right now, I'd say my favorite TV show is probably The Good Place. I just got done with that.
Awesome. Jack, I think you're the last one we haven't heard from.
Oh, yeah. Well, Jack Knoxville, he, him, Knoxville, Tennessee. My favorite show right now. I actually am really into this show Special also. I mean, Heather and I have been up until like 2:00 in the morning and I'm like, no, I have to go to bed. I have to work. So yeah, I am definitely getting sucked into that. And I love that. So season 2 just, so it's great. We still have a little ways to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for jumping in and introducing yourself. Like I said, we're going to spend some good time together tonight. So it's nice that we get to meet each other up front. And I actually want to go over some community agreements to keep our space tonight comfortable for everybody and a space to learn. So if you want to go to the next slide for me, Jack. We've got a list here. I'll go through them, but please feel free to drop in the chat if you have other community agreements you like to use in other spaces. The platinum rule is kind of a twist on the golden rule. It is treat other people the way they like to be treated. This just acknowledges that the way that you want to be treated may be differently than how other people want to show up. And so we need to respect how other people ask us to treat them. Move up, move back. If you are someone who is talkative, take a break and give space for other people to speak up. And if you're like me, a little more introverted, step into some leadership and offer your ideas. We want to hear from you. Assume best intentions, but acknowledge the impact of your words and actions. Jargon giraffe is a big one. If I use an acronym or a word, you're not sure what that means, feel free to come off of mute and interrupt me and ask me to define it, or drop it in the chat, and I will make sure that I provide a definition so we all are coming from the same understanding. Don't yuck my yum, acknowledging that things that like, you know, you may like, other people may not be into, and vice versa. And so again, just being respectful of everyone here in our space. Las Vegas rules. This means what's said here stays here, what's learned here leaves here. I think this one is particularly important for tonight's training, as we're going to be sharing our stories with each other, and we shouldn't be repeating stories that aren't our own, but definitely take the learnings and the skills you get tonight and enact them in all of the advocacy that you are doing. One DVAX, one mic, only one person talking at a time, please. Respect everyone's pronouns. Land the plane. This means we've got a lot of content to get through tonight. So if you are offering some advice or feedback, let's get to the point so we can hear from everybody. Be present, be punctual. Y'all are doing really good on this so far. We've got a few activities throughout our time together tonight. So just make sure you come back within the time that we give so that we can all continue learning together. And then finally, no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. So please offer your idea, answer questions, even if you're not sure you're right. We've got a lot of experts and good ideas on the call, so we will get there together. Any questions on community agreements or things folks want to add? Ooh, I see Donna has permission to be messy. Yes, I love that one. Do you want to come off mute, Donna, and say a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, it means like a lot of times I have something in my head that I want to say, but the sentence really just isn't even literally structured in like subject, verb, period. And so I just kind of talk without really making a whole lot of sense. And I don't have a lot of time to really formulate an entire sentence. So that's one of them. There was one thing, if you don't mind, Catherine, would you revisit the Las Vegas rules? I think I just missed them. Thanks.
Yeah, yes. So Las Vegas rules is what's said here stays here, and what's learned here leaves here. So after today, don't go repeating the stories that you've heard from other folks on the call, but you can take away and repeat and enact like the learnings and skills we're going to teach together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or other community agreements folks want to add?
Hi, this is Robin. I don't know. I know that we're offering this training twice, and I'm just listening to these community agreements, which I absolutely love. I think they're great. But recognizing that I am kind of only giving half my attention, would it be better for me to just drop off of this call completely and join on Saturday when I can maybe block out my 100% attention so that I'm not a distraction to the group?
I will leave that up to you and Jack. I think like that is really like your call to make. Like parenting and other things that are going on in life is super hard. So I don't mind as a facilitator, but I will let Jack chime in.
Yeah, take care of whatever you need to take care of. And if it's better for you and you feel like you can focus better on Saturday, by all means, feel free to jump in then. But like as of right now, you're not a distraction. So if you want to kind of hang out here too and just kind of halfway pay attention and then come Saturday, whatever feels the most comfortable for you, by all means, please do.
Thank you. I'm going to hang as long as I can then, because I love what I'm hearing so far. Thank you so much.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks, Robin. Any other comments, questions, things folks want to add to this? All right, I'm going to have us go to the next slide then, Jack, and kind of cover very broadly what we want to learn today. So really, we're here together to take a deeper dive into how to use stories with a clear challenge, choice, and outcome structure to communicate our shared values with the public in order to move them to action. We know that people and stories are more likely to motivate communities to act over like data and like graphs and stuff. So we really want to work on putting a face to issues pertaining to like rights and justice as a way to remind people of the urgency of the moment and get them to act. So I'm going to hand it over to Jack to kind of tell us a little bit more about the urgency of right now and why we're hosting this training today.
Sure. So, as many of you know, there have been over 120 anti-trans bills that have been introduced across this country since January 1st. This is coming from 33 different states. Just recently here in Tennessee, we had 2 bathroom bills pass, one targeting students and the other one targeting everybody else. One of the requirements is that businesses who are going to allow trans people to use their public restrooms have got to post a sign indicating that trans people, you may encounter a trans person while you're in this space, because you know the big bad scary trans people. So one of my basic theories of change here is that for far too long, the GOP and these conservative folks have been controlling the narrative of who we are as a community. And because of that, they're able to perpetuate that fear and gain support for these horrible anti-trans pieces of legislation, just as they've done with so many other topics. And it's a way to continue to oppress this community. So for me, especially, I will also say, in the work that we do here with Trans Empowerment Project, the purpose of our work is not to interact with and organize within a white supremacist system. This is to create our own systems, our own paths to the resources that we need. And in order to do that, we have to start taking back some of this power. And so the purpose of tonight's call is really so that we can do that and start telling our stories, our real lived experiences as trans people, and also as allies of trans people who are showing up. We want to hear, why are you showing up for a community that maybe you don't belong to? As a trans person, what has been your actual lived experience rather than these, ridiculous stories that other people are painting for us? So organizing, especially as we start working on building power for this community and really trying to organize change and create these new systems, storytelling is seriously the most powerful tool that we have. And Catherine's going to do a great job of helping everybody to understand why storytelling is so powerful and the ways that you can use your own story to create power for yourself and not just this community, but any other issue that you care about and would like to show up for. So that being said, I'm going to hand it back over to Catherine and let her take it away.
Cool. Thanks. I wanted to give a little bit of background about the team that I work on at Planned Parenthood and why we do storytelling. And I think it really relates to what Jack was saying about a way to reclaim your own power and make sure that you are involved in the moment and the movement for change. So at Planned Parenthood, I manage our patient advocacy programs, the goal of which is to center the people Planned Parenthood serves in all of our advocacy efforts. So we have programs meant to give visitors of our health centers opportunities to get involved and take action for their own health and rights, and programs outside of our health centers to engage the communities in similar manners. And we know that one way we can center our patient advocates is to create opportunities and support them to share their own experiences and really their own expertise around sexual and reproductive health care, because like Jack said, we know that stories are an important tool for change. And so that's something we want to build here together, as well as giving you all the tools that you need to do your own organizing and your own advocacy for your own rights and justice. So that's a little bit of the background that I come into this with. And I also want to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got involved with reproductive advocacy. So if you want to go to the next slide for me. I grew up in Iowa in a very liberally Midwestern religious family. My mom had me canvassing for presidential elections with her. And I went to my first caucus for the Iowa caucus in elementary school. So I was always a little bit nerdy about politics, but it was something that I just did for fun with my mom. And that was kind of about it. So after I finished my first year of college, I was at home for Iowa in the summer. It was really late at night. I was scrolling Twitter instead of sleeping, like any good millennial in 2013. And I had my laptop up here and I was like scrolling through Twitter when I stumbled on President Obama, who tweeted out a link to this woman down in Texas who was filibustering an anti-choice bill. And like I said, a little nerdy about politics, I clicked through and I started watching this woman named Wendy Davis talk about like how terrible this bill was. And I started like researching on the side what this bill was doing. And it was going to shut down health centers for really like asinine reasons. Like their hallway width wasn't wide enough. They didn't have enough water fountains, or their paint color was wrong. Like things that actually didn't have anything to do with their ability to provide safe care. It was just a way to make sure that people didn't have access to abortion. And I like remember laying in bed, rolling my eyes, thinking like Texas is doing the most. Like this is not going to go anywhere. Like how annoying. And that like that stinks for Texas is kind of how I was thinking, which is like not a good way to view it, but that's how I was in that moment. And the senator, her name was Wendy Davis, was sharing all of these stories from people down in Texas who had gotten abortions and what this bill would have meant if it had passed when they needed care. And I was just really, I think in that moment, taken aback that this is something that folks are still trying to fight against. I really like it was so out of my mind that this is something that people would be trying to stop 40 years after Roe. And so I started like looking up a little bit of my own state laws about abortion care and learned that Iowa a few years previously had passed like very small increments of anti-abortion legislation. And I was just like devastated. And you know, when you had that like you're on a roller coaster and your stomach just like drops, and like that is what I felt in that moment in my bed, realizing like I felt very personally responsible that this had passed in Iowa and I had no idea, but I thought that I was like involved. And so I put a lot of personal redemption in Wendy Davis that night, which was not the best way to handle that situation, but what I did. And she was reading these bills and getting close to midnight, which was the final time that she needed to carry over. Their session was over. They couldn't vote on the bill. And the anti-choice politicians in the legislature with her kept giving her like, what I want to say demerits, because I can't think of the real word right now. But they kept like cutting her off and they said, you've had too many of these. You can't continue speaking. We're going to vote on this bill. It was obviously going to pass. And a lot of people in Texas were going to lose access to abortion. And then you just hear this like chanting and screaming, and it's all of these people in the rotunda above her who were there cheering her on. And they were so loud and went on for so long that the senators couldn't hear themselves on the floor. They couldn't vote on the bill. And so they like were able to hold off this passage of the bill, which meant that people in Texas could still get care. And like every time I recount the story, I have goosebumps. You like can't see them over Zoom, but it was so cool to see all of those people there. And in that moment, I was like, I need to do that. I need to be there. And so I started looking online to see where these people were coming from. And like Planned Parenthood was obviously a mobilizer of those folks. And so that evening, I Facebook messaged my local Planned Parenthood where I went to school and said, like, I need to get involved. What can I do? And so I became an intern and started being a volunteer with them, and kind of just kept at it until I was an organizer for the Planned Parenthood in Virginia, where we actually got to mobilize and get our activists to undo some of the legislation Virginia had passed that was really similar to what happened in Texas, which was really just like a full picture moment for me that I got to bring volunteers and supporters to, Virginia's own version of undoing that legislation that first got me involved there. But I think, the one thing that I think about that got me really motivated to be involved first and foremost was hearing stories of people down in Texas who needed abortion care. I had never had an abortion, but hearing what they had went through really got me involved that evening. So that is how I ended up doing this work. And I am still here a few years later. So if you want to go to the next slide for me, Jack, we're going to talk a little bit today about the public narrative. So we have to have stories that move people to act and support us because we can't do this alone. And I think that that is one thing that I often think about when I remember how I first got involved in this work. Our movements are up against a lot of scary institutions and opposition. And it's impossible to tear those down alone. So we need folks with us. And we also know that we cannot advocate on behalf of other people. We instead need to advocate like alongside folks who are impacted by the issues that we care about. So sharing our stories is one way that we can do that. If you're sharing your own story, you can be involved in legislative efforts through lobbying, and you can do things like mobilize other people to take action, even if they're not elected officials, but by engaging your community, your friends and family to join you in these efforts. So that is like why we think about the public narrative and think it's really important to affecting change. So if you want to go to the next slide, there are 3 parts to the public narrative. There is the story of self. So that is what I just shared with you. This is the like why I am called to action. What impact does the bigger picture have on me? We have the story of self, which is, why do we matter in this fight together? What does this mean for the community overall? How does this issue affect us? And then the story of now, which is like the urgency of the moment. What are our next steps? What do I need you to do with me to take action? Because we really know that stories mobilize, they motivate, and they empower us to act in that urgency of now, which is that 3rd part of the public narrative. So I've got a few examples of how stories are used. If you want to go to the next one. I think one that may seem familiar to folks or you can easily picture is through the media. This is a picture of someone who was sharing her story at a press conference for Senator Kirsten Gillibrand around the Kavanaugh appointment to the Supreme Court a few years ago. And this setting in particular is super effective because with multiple media outlets, it really enables our message to reach a wider audience of individuals and communities. And there's also another way stories can be used in media, if you want to go to the next slide, by doing something like this, which is kind of a filmed direct to camera set. So if you want to play it, Jack, we can. I do just want to give a content warning of mentions of harassment and suicide. So if you need to step away for a few minutes, I think it's about 3 minutes long.
Every election cycle, the American voter has to grapple with controversial issues like terrorism or abortion. But this year, the debate is taking place in an area that most of us would want to avoid: the public bathroom.
So if Caitlyn Jenner were to walk into Trump Tower and want to use the bathroom, you would be fine with her using any bathroom she chooses?
That is correct.
Proponents of a new law in North Carolina say that allowing transgender people to go to the bathroom in a bathroom that fits with their gender identity would cause the end of public schools as we know it.
If this prevails, this will be the end of public schools as we know it.
Although it's a hot topic right now, other cities have already implemented this policy. In fact, the 3 largest school districts, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, all already have that policy in place with no notable uptick in assaults.
So if this bathroom policy is already in place in so many areas in the United States, then why are people so terrified?
I know.
This is Chase Tranchio. He's a lawyer at the ACLU, and he's transgender.
You do?
Yeah, I know why.
Why? Tell me why.
Well, I think people are really anxious about the fact that we have to share public space with people who are different from ourselves in general. And right now, there's all this attention on transgender people. So people are focusing all of the fear and confusion about who trans people are around their anxiety about the bathrooms in general and trying to expel transgender people from public space. We've seen it over and over again throughout history. The reality is that bathrooms have long been a battleground, and we saw this in the context of the civil rights movement and efforts to expel Black people from spaces that white people dominated, including bathrooms and locker rooms.
Wait, what are you doing in the women's bathroom?
If I was in North Carolina, I would have to use the women's bathroom because I was assigned female at birth. So I would be a dude in the women's bathroom. That's what the law requires.
What? Are you saying that these lawmakers are literally causing the problem that they say that they want to avoid in the first place?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But can you give me a minute?
Oh yeah, sorry. To be fair, creating gender-neutral spaces is tricky. There's a rec center in New York where they allowed a gender-neutral locker room, and some parents were concerned about girls being in the same room as men.
But if these lawmakers are so worried about men entering women's bathrooms, then why are they passing a law that will effectively do just that? The biggest irony is that HB 2 and laws like it would in fact force trans men to enter and use women's bathrooms. If public officials want to spend money and time debating a real problem, it should be the dangers that transgender people face in America, like the homicide rate that has hit a historic high in the US, or the fact that 41% of trans people have already attempted suicide. Just last year, a transgender homecoming king and activist in North Carolina committed suicide. Why aren't lawmakers in that state alarmed by that instead?
And if lawmakers insist on elbowing their way into the restroom, maybe they should address the real and well-documented harassment of transgender people in restrooms. One study found that 70% of trans individuals have experienced some form of harassment in a bathroom. And bills like HB 2 heighten that danger. Bills like it, even if they don't even pass, could cause a public health crisis in the transgender community. Maybe those should be the numbers keeping lawmakers up at night.
Great, thank you, Jack. I think in that clip, we see Chase contextualize, an issue that's happening through legislation with his own lived experience, really, again, showing folks putting a face to the issue that we're talking about. Another way folks can do this is through lobbying elected officials. This is an example of a storyteller talking to Senator Patty Murray about Title X protections, which is the only federal program to provide family planning services to folks of low income. So we've talked about press conferences, doing direct to camera features for the media, as well as lobbying. Are there other ways folks have seen stories used to shape public narrative that they want to offer as examples?
I'm going to notice not to take up a whole lot of space here, but I do want to say that I work in email a lot. And so, the personal narrative and the personal story in email is, proven to be statistically super effective. And I'm also on this really, it's called Nerdy Email. So that'll tell you who the audience is. And the participants are is like a nerdy email Google group, and they send around oftentimes really good examples of a personal narrative. So I'm always looking for that, something catching, something. And I just saw one come into my inbox recently, and I didn't pass it on to the nerdy email thread, but it's just the kind of thing that would really excite them.
Yeah, yes. So email communications, I think I've also seen it, similarly in donor appeal letters that get mailed out to folks. Any other examples folks want to lift up? Yeah, to Congress. I think I've seen the lobbying here, and also senators reading people's stories on the floor. Yeah, I think another big one too, I would offer that I think we're all familiar with, but maybe just don't think about, oh yeah, that's storytelling, is at rallies. Or virtual events now in these spaces, when folks are standing up and telling you why they are upset about an issue or excited about an issue. It's usually about their own lived experience. So that's another way that storytelling shows up. Ooh, yes. And Links said commercials in the chat as well. Yeah, totally. Cool. So if you want to go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the way that we understand the world. So there are two ways to think about it. The first is through our head, and the second is through our heart. So when we think about how we view the world through our head, what does that make people think of? And again, feel free to come off of mute or share in the chat.
Catherine, can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
So when I say understanding the world through our head, what does that mean to you, or what does that make you think of? Awesome. I've got some chats here. Numbers and empirical data, that was hard for me, being more analytical from a logical perspective, viewing things as very organized and logical. Yes, y'all are spot on. So what about when we say understanding the world through our heart? What does that make you think of?
For me, like seeing like I guess viewing things like through my heart is like, how does this make me feel? Like what maybe like other experiences has this reminded me of? And I definitely feel like it's a lot of like that in that like place you kind of view things from like your experience and like how you walk through the
Yes, yes, exactly. So what does it make you feel? Relating it to other things that you know. I see in the chat a lot of like emotions, appealing to the emotional side, tugging at the heartstrings. Yeah, exactly. Those are all spot on. So if you want to go to the next slide, I want us to think about like what happens when we only lead with the head. Can somebody give me like, what you think happens when we only do that? Overwhelmed. Yeah. Yeah. We lack compassion. It can be kind of dehumanizing. Yeah. Yeah. Can anyone think of a campaign or a social movement that really only led with the head? So it was really only that like strategy, that analytical piece. I can give two examples that I hear during this training. The first one is Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign was really policy heavy and was really, I don't want to use the word nerdy, but like it was just very much kind of in the weeds about the very specific, policy. She was very studied on that and it didn't connect with people in their heart. And the other one I have heard from folks is the environmental justice work led by white-led organizations is very set in the data and the science behind it in a way that people cannot comprehend. So that one is like very specific. What about the other side? So what happens when we only lead with our heart? Things can get messy quickly. If you're too analytical, it can come off as cold. Links said Occupy. Links, is that an example of a social movement that you're thinking of there?
Yes, from what I experienced of Occupy, it just felt like there wasn't really a plan, but there was a lot of feelings about what needed to be done.
Yes. Yep. That is the example I hear a lot too. Absolutely. When you're just like really leading with that heart, there's a lot of feeling and passion behind it, but there isn't a game plan to get the change that we want. So we really, I think here we need both of them, right? We need that like head, that analytical piece, the strategy, and we need that to be motivated and like kept alive by the passion that we're feeling through our heart. Does anyone have an example of a campaign, of a social movement that's really combined them both successfully?
I feel like I want to say Black Lives Matter. I feel like there's a lot of feeling, but I feel like There is action too, but I don't know if they're like equal.
Yeah, and I don't think that it needs to be equal, right? Like it doesn't have to be 50% head, 50% heart. But having a little bit of both means that we are moving towards our goal in a way that like is going to get us the outcome that we want, that head piece, but also is like doing it in a way that is passionate and is getting other folks to join us because we're connecting on those feelings, which we'll talk about in a bit. So I think that is a great example. Yes, sunrise movement. I think another one I've heard a lot too is the Obama campaign did a good job of doing both of those things. So we've said this, if you want to go to the next slide, I think this is just a visual representation of what we need here. We need that how, the strategy, the analysis, and we need that the why, the motivation to really get that action, because we need to engage people to interpret why they should change their world and how they can go about doing that. So that's really where stories come in. If you want to go to the next slide for me, they do a good job of connecting us to that why and that motivation because they engage our emotions. If you want to click once more. We don't think about our values, but we feel them. And oftentimes, like we don't realize that we value, like what we value in the world until we hear a story or witness an injustice that stirs emotions with us. I think about my own story and how, like, if you had asked me, like, do you care about abortion? I'd be like, yeah, totally, you know, and like pretty blasé about it. But hearing those stories from people who would have been impacted by losing care in Texas really made me feel how important it was to stand up in that moment and do something about it, because I value like bodily autonomy and being able to plan for my future and take care of my community. And abortion rights is one way to do that. So emotions inform us of what we value within ourselves, within others, and the world. And then they enable us to express the motivational like content of our values to others. And stories are a great way to do that. If you want to click once more for me. When we're able to tell our story and show our values through emotion that way, it's a way to like stir people to take action and to do something about the issue that we are talking about. So I've got another video here that I think does a really good job of talking about somebody's experience in a way that as the like audience, we can hear their values and like we know that those are values we care about too. So we can watch this one real quick as well.
Trae tu teléfono viejo o roto y te damos hasta $1,000 en nuestros mejores teléfonos 5G, solo en Verizon.
Do this. Take one. Take one. How did you feel when I first told you I was a girl?
I felt scared because I already knew in my heart. Who's your favorite superhero and why?
Wonder Woman. Because she's kind-hearted.
When do you feel the most brave?
Well, when somebody is very mean to my little brother, then I start to get angry and then get brave because I know they won't hurt me because I'm protecting my little brother. When are you the most worried about me?
When the political atmosphere starts ramping up against transgender people, or when I hear about another transgender woman being hurt. Do you ever feel scared about being transgender?
No.
Do you ever feel like other people don't understand what it is to be transgender? Is there ever a time when someone treated you differently because you're transgender?
Yes, at my old school back in Houston.
How were they treating you differently?
Because I was never allowed to go to the girls' bathroom. They would just make me go to a random bathroom that was supposed to be for all the students. And there was even a sign saying for all students. And my teacher would might only let the girls go there, so I would feel like it was the proper bathroom for me. But the thing was, I would always have accidents because the door always locked.
So how is Austin ISD different?
I think they call me by my correct name, and they let me go to the correct bathroom, and it makes me feel happy.
So when you think about the word transgender, what do you see or what do you think about?
I think about rainbows and cupcakes with smiles and roses. It's one thing I've been able to teach you.
How to be a better Christian, how to be kinder, less judgmental, and more loving, and way more patient.
Yeah, I always get you on those potty words.
Yes, you do. So what's been the happiest part since Mommy understood who you really are?
Well, finally being able to wear panties.
Why? How does that make you feel? Why is that special?
Because I know you were starting to understand me more better. Has your faith changed or has it stayed the same?
So my faith is stronger than it's ever been. We haven't deterred at all. Our faith is stronger than ever. What does it mean to you that you're trans? What do you wish people knew about transgender people?
That Jesus loves them. How have you surprised yourself?
Well, Mommy's come a very long way in this process. And I have surprised myself how far I'm willing to go for you. You did so good. I'm proud of you.
Awesome. Thank you,
Oh, my girl.
Jack. I think this,
Do this.
like story, this story from Teen Vogue does a really good job of showing us values and or showing emotion and having us connect on them with our values. So I'd love to hear from folks kind of the values that they saw portrayed throughout this clip.
I'm not really sure if this counts as like a value, but kind of acceptance and, like growth, I guess.
Yeah, that's totally a value. Like, I think we all, want to feel accepted and belong and like have that growth with the people that we care about. Totally. Donna says, Donna said, I kind of lost it when they started talking about faith, such feels. Yeah, like religion and faith, spirituality is a huge value, especially in American culture. And so being able to connect with other folks on that is super, super great. Any other trust? Yeah, especially like that developing trust between like a mother and child or a parent and child, I think is something that a lot of folks can relate to, especially people who are parents themselves. Yeah, great. So I think like this, again, this clip I think does a really good job of having somebody talk about their experience and not naming like, well, I value X, Y, and Z, but they're showing us and they are telling us by the way they're talking about their story and their experience. So by doing that and showing their values and getting us to feel things emotionally, they're also moving us to do things. So if you want to go to the next slide, we know that stories can move us from kind of feelings of stagnation. So, fear, isolation, self-doubt, into kind of a space we think about of motivation or action. So they get us to understand the urgency of taking action. They can make us angry, and that is a motivator to do things. They can make us feel hope and solidarity, or this acronym, which stands for You Can Make a Difference. So again, I think leaning into that feeling of solidarity there. One campaign I think does a really good job of doing all of these things. If you want to go to the next slide, is the You Know Me campaign from a few years ago. It really took off on social media pretty organically, as Congress was hearing some anti-abortion bills and state legislatures were as well. It was about folks sharing their abortion story to say that like 1 in 4 people are going to have an abortion in their lifetime. And I was one of them. And it did a really good job of showing like the urgency of sharing these stories in the moment because of all the bills that were passing. It was really like people were fired up and angry that states were still trying to pass restrictions on abortion care, and that moved people to take action. It really also like created a space of solidarity and hope, because abortion is something that folks don't often talk about, but seeing a lot of stories come up online gave folks that feeling of community. And also like sharing stories is one way that folks can make a difference and motivate people to take action. So it kind of shifted folks again from that self-doubt that this is something they couldn't talk about to giving them a way to make change. So that's one way we have seen it in action. So now now that we've talked a little bit about emotions and values and why we do these as motivators, we're going to talk about how we craft a story to do those things. So if you want to go to the next slide, we've got a structure here that is like really strong at inspiring listeners to feel their own values and challenges them into a new way of thinking about choices. So we're going to talk about the plot because every good story has a plot, and in organizing, our plot structure is challenge, choice, and outcome. And that kind of like triangle is sharing a moral the whole time, or the way I like to think about the moral is like the value that we want to share throughout the plot. So a challenge, if you want to go to the next slide, is like obviously very, very important to our story, because if there's no challenge, there's nothing that we can teach. And so the challenge is a very specific point or moments in time that forces somebody to make a strategic choice. So I always think about the challenge being that fork in the road where you arrive to it and there are two things that you can do. And so the one thing I do want to point out as we're thinking about your own story of self is thinking about like one specific moment to share. We all have a lot of moments and points in our lives, and it's not always the most effective way to communicate the action we want people to do by sharing all of them. So you can choose a very like specific moment to use as your story. So would love to hear if folks can recall back to my story way at the beginning. And I know we've heard a few since then, so it may be a little bit challenging, but can anybody recall the challenge that I had in my story? It's been a minute, so I'm going to give us not a clue. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but when I was listening to Wendy Davis and I realized that these states had passed, or these laws had passed in similar measure in my own state, I immediately felt really helpless and that I like hadn't done anything. So if you want to go to the next slide for me, great. So I faced a choice here. Does anyone want to take a guess at what the choices available to me were at that moment?
I mean, you could like do nothing, or you could figure out what you could do.
Exactly. Yeah, that fork in the road for me was like doing nothing or doing something. So that's the strategic choice here. And if you're thinking about that fork in the road metaphor, the choice is like choosing to go left or going right. And you laid it out perfectly. I could do nothing or I could do something. And so I did something. If you want to go 2 slides for me, I got involved and I messaged Planned Parenthood on Facebook asking to volunteer, which was a choice indeed. And then if you want to go next slide for me, we have outcomes. So I know we probably have all like read a book or seen a movie that doesn't have an outcome. It just leaves us hanging, and it is incredibly frustrating to get to that point and like a super letdown. So we always want to have an outcome to our story, and in organizing, It's really important to think about the story that we want to tell, like I said, when you're choosing that challenge. But it's also important because you want to have a story that has an outcome. And so if you're like still like in your story in this moment, it doesn't have an outcome yet, that's okay. That may just not be the story that you want to tell right now. And you may like revisit it when it gets to that outcome for you. So like, that's totally fine. Just like want to acknowledge that that kind of happens. So for me, in my outcome, if you want to go to the next slide, is I became an organizer and I got to undo similar legislation that first got me involved in the reproductive rights space in Virginia. So that is like the outcome of my story. Clearly it's ongoing. I'm still organizing, but like that was the very specific outcome to that story. So we're going to dive in a few minutes and have you think about your own stories, but I want to give you some tips and tricks before that. If you want to go to the next slide for me, Jack. We want to tell the story, not about the story. So be specific, be vivid and clear. I talk about that feeling, the drop in my stomach, laying on my bed and typing on Twitter to give folks a visual of like what I was doing in that moment. You also want to be ready to tell your own story. And I know the slide says therapy versus vulnerability, but I really like to think about this as speaking from your scars and not your wounds. And you're going to know the difference based off of the hurt you feel when you speak out about it. And so sometimes things may be, hard to speak out, but we can do it. And so that's speaking from our scar. Again, you want to pick a choice point or two. So don't tell your whole life or give us your resume. Be short, around 3 minutes. That's usually people's attention span, as well as the time you get when you're like speaking in public spaces. And then you want to center yourself. You should always be the main character of your story. I think in my example, I easily could have told you all the stories that I heard from Wendy Davis, but those were not my stories to tell. I made myself the main character about how hearing that impacted me and spurred me to action. And so thinking about why you're called to do this work, even if you're, not like, for me, I wasn't an abortion storyteller, but I can talk about how hearing stories from other people spurred me to action. So making sure that you're the main character, and then stick to that challenge, choice, and outcome structure, because we know it works. It keeps you within that time frame, and it is like a safe way to structure stories. So I'm going to give folks 5 minutes to develop your own story with that challenge, choice, and outcome structure. And I think, Jack, did folks get worksheets for this?
No, we never got any.
Oh, no. All right, I'll make sure we fix that for Saturday. Sorry about that.
And we can also send these out to anybody who's here. So, and I saw earlier there was a question about whether or not the slides would be available. We can absolutely make these slides available for you all, and then we'll send out the worksheets that Catherine was just referencing, so you can revisit this. And as you know, it is being recorded, so we've got that too.
Yeah. The TLDR on the worksheets is that it gives you a space to name your challenge, your choice, and your outcome. So if y'all have scrap paper or a Word doc app, you can do that too. And I'll time us for 5 minutes. 2 more minutes. Okay, I'm gonna pull folks back this way. Feel free to keep taking some notes if you need, and I'm gonna explain the next step of our process here. If you wanna go 2 slides for me, Jack. We are gonna break out into some small pairs to hear each other's stories and offer some coaching tips. So if you are serving as the coach, which everyone will, you really want to listen for and identify those choice points that people made, ask more about them if they weren't clear, and ask, find the roots of the choice that they then made, ask why. You want to be sure that you can identify the challenge, the choice, and the outcome. If those weren't clear, ask about them some more so the person who told their story can make sure they're a little bit more specific in it. Making sure that your partner is showing you their story and not just telling you that X, Y, and Z happened. And then think about time. So making sure that folks are staying within that kind of 3-minute mark. So the way we're going to do this, if you want to go to the next slide, is pairing up. So you'll be joining a breakout room with one other person. You will each share your story for 3 minutes and then have the other person provide you coaching for 2, and then you'll switch and go the other way. Any questions on the breakout room? Cool, Jack, you can send us all out into the breakout rooms then.
Great, they're getting started right now.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is great.
Yeah, do you want to pause the recording since it's just us?
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
Perfect. And then for time, I know we originally were gonna